In case we have never met, I'm Michael Price, and I want to help you succeed in the GSA and VA contract world.
Hello, I'm Michael Price, your host.
Today is June 18th, and I'm Nancy, your co-host.
Welcome to the deep dive. So, if you have ever felt completely, suffocated by bureaucratic red tape at work,
Oh, who hasn't?
right? Or if you've ever found yourself just stuck under this mountain of administrative paperwork instead of doing the actual job you were hired to do, well, this one is for you.
Definitely for you.
Because today we are looking into the surprisingly fascinating world of federal government procurement. Specifically, we're talking about how the General Services Administration, the GSA, which is basically the massive engine behind federal purchasing, how they are actively dismantling their own bureaucracy.
Which is wild. You just don't hear about the government doing that.
No, you really don't. And to explore this, we are synthesizing two really great sources today. We've got a recent Federal News Network article by Amber Corin, which details their new strategic paradigm.
Yeah, a really solid piece of reporting.
It is. And we're pairing that with a set of internal analyst notes from the 18th of June, 2026. These notes really get under the hood to reveal how the GSA is actually pulling this off using this blend of AI, sweeping rulebook overhauls, and surprisingly psychological safety.
Yeah, it's a remarkable pivot for a massive federal agency because, usually you expect the government's answer to complex problems to just be, well, more process, right? More form.
More forms, more oversight, exactly.
But instead, the GSA is tackling what they call process paralysis by deliberately giving their workforce more freedom and more discretion.
So to really appreciate the scale of this pivot, I think we first have to understand the sheer weight of the trap these employees have been caught in. We need to look at what Nick West is dealing with.
Right, Thickwis.
He is the director of the GSA's Office of Acquisition, Policy, Integrity, and Workforce. His team basically oversees the broader acquisition landscape, and he describes the current state of affairs as a tangle of pressures.
A tangle is a very polite way to put it, honestly, because the demographic data from his office paints just a really stark picture of that tangle. They are facing this ever-shrinking pool of contracting professionals.
Which is terrifying when you think about how much money they handle.
Oh, totally. And while the workforce shrinks, the external demands are actually multiplying. They're dealing with, constant organizational shifts. They've got rapidly evolving cybersecurity standards that require hypervigilance on literally every single contract.
Because the threats are always changing.
Exactly. And on top of that, there are much tighter expectations from top leadership regarding speed and accountability.
So they're essentially being asked to do increasingly high-stakes work, but do it much faster and with significantly fewer people.
Right, and West expects that shrinking workforce trend to just continue over the next several years. So the breaking point they've reached is that contracting officers are spending the vast majority of their time just navigating the machinery of compliance.
The red tape.
Yeah, the red tape. They are basically drowning in the mechanics of the process rather than actually executing the mission.
It essentially turns highly trained strategists into data entry clerks.
Yes.
They aren't spending their time on strategic planning or engaging with the industries they're buying from, or even focusing on what the actual outcome of the contract is supposed to be.
Get it.
It strikes me as being, it's somewhat like hiring a brilliant world-class executive chef to run your restaurant.
Okay, I like this.
But then you force that chef to spend 90% of their day filling out these incredibly detailed inventory forms for flour.
Oh, wow.
And writing multi-page memos about spatulas instead of, actually cooking any food.
The chef analogy is incredibly apt here. It really is, because a contracting officer's role, much like a chef's, is supposed to be dynamic. It has to be responsive to the environment.
Yeah, taste the soup, right?
Exactly. And the issue with relying on a one-size-fits-all process-heavy mandate is that it assumes every single procurement is identical, which they aren't.
Not at all.
So when you force your experts to act as mere administrative processors, it fundamentally stifles innovation, and it leads directly to profound burnout. You cannot tell an overworked team to just focus on high-level strategy when they still have those 50 inventory forms due by 5 o'clock.
Right, because you can't just wish the forms away. Federal procurement requires documentation by law, so you have to physically remove the rote busy work from their desks before they can start cooking.
You have to clear the counter.
Yes, clear the counter. And looking at these internal analyst notes, the GSA's mechanism for doing that is leaning really heavily into generative AI. They are bringing in, essentially, the ultimate administrative assistant.
which is huge. The structural shift we're seeing here is a massive push to use AI to eliminate all that manual duplicative work.
The soul-crushing stuff.
Completely soul-crushing. We're talking about the generation of incredibly dense, complex procurement documents, things like requirements documents, solicitations, evaluation plans, quality assurance surveillance plans.
Just a wall of text.
A massive wall of text. And historically, drafting these involved pulling up an old similar contract, copying the text, pasting it into a new document, and then painstakingly updating all the details manually to fit the new requirement.
Which is not only tedious, but incredibly prone to human error. I mean, if someone is tired on a Friday afternoon and forgets to update a specific clause buried on page 40.
It happens all the time, but Nick West notes that with the adoption of these new tech tools, generating the foundational documents that drive a procurement has literally never been easier. The AI handles the rote generation. It standardizes the boilerplate.
Which kills the copy-paste errors.
Exactly. It significantly reduces the inconsistencies that naturally occur with manual copy-pasting, and furthermore, the AI is actually designed to connect the workforce.
How so?
Well, it provides instant access to shared use cases, previous lessons learned, communities of practice. It builds this web of context and collaboration across the entire agency.
Yeah, and the internal notes highlight one specific application of this that completely blew my mind. They are fundamentally changing how acquisition planning works by using what they call oral acquisition plans.
Oh, the time savings on those alone are just staggering.
Let's break down the mechanics of how that actually works. Because traditionally, drafting an acquisition plan meant creating a massive document and passing it back and forth for weeks or even months.
Yeah, a nightmare.
You had different departments adding edits, waiting on sequential approvals, battling version control.
Oh, version control is the worst. It's the definition of a bureaucratic bottleneck.
But now, using these AI tools combined with reduced compliance steps, the teams conduct these oral acquisition plans. They basically hold a structured meeting where they discuss and finalize the key decisions in real time. And the AI operates essentially as an ultra-advanced compliance scribe. It uses speech to text, combined with compliance checking algorithms to capture the discussion, cross-reference it against the rulebook, and instantly generate the legally sound documentation.
It's brilliant.
They are taking a cycle that used to burn weeks or months and condensing it down to a few hours of collaborative discussion.
It completely redefines the timeline of federal purchasing.
It is incredibly impressive. Okay, but let's unpack this for a second.
Sure.
Because the moment you combine the words AI with government contracting, the immediate mental image most people get is a system of rogue algorithms independently picking vendors and writing million-dollar checks from the federal treasury with zero human oversight.
Yeah, Skynet handing out defense contracts, it is a very common concern, but the sources emphasize that the GSA is absolutely not removing the human from the loop.
Okay.
The AI is not making the complex award choices. It's not evaluating the qualitative nuances of a vendor's proposal.
I understand the intention is to keep humans in the driver's seat, but, I mean, if the AI is generating the core evaluation plans, writing the solicitations, running the basic compliance checks, doesn't the human officer risk falling victim to automation bias?
That's a fair question.
How does the GSA ensure the contracting officer doesn't just get complacent and blindly rubber stamp whatever the AI spits out?
That is the exact tension the analyst notes address regarding their AI adoption strategy. The system is intentionally designed not to be an autopilot, but a co-pilot.
A co-pilot?
Right. The interface requires active validation from the contracting officers. The AI's role is to aggregate the context, format the data, flag potential anomalies. But the human must review those flags and actually exercise their judgment.
So it serves them with the info, but they still have to make the call.
Exactly. The sources explicitly describe the intended role of the contracting officer going forward as a business advisor and technology translator.
Oh, I like that phrase. Technology translator.
Yeah, the tools handle the administrative load specifically, so the human has the mental bandwidth to critically evaluate the AI's output, manage the risk, and improve communication with the industry.
So the automation doesn't replace the decision maker, it elevates them by removing the noise.
Precisely.
But that introduces a completely different problem, because automating a broken, overly complex process just gives you a broken process faster.
Right, doing the wrong things with incredible efficiency.
Exactly. If the underlying rulebook still demands 50 unnecessary steps, the AI is just accelerating the busy work without actually improving the outcome.
And that is the crucial second layer to the GSA strategy. Technology alone cannot solve process paralysis if the policy environment remains hostile to efficiency. And that brings us to what they're calling the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul, or the RFO.
Reading about the environment these contracting officers previously operated in, it sounds like an absolute labyrinth.
It was incredibly convoluted. Contracting officers had to ensure compliance with the FIR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which is dense enough on its own.
It's massive.
But on top of that, they had to navigate individual agency supplements, plus hundreds of fragmented, duplicative, and frequently contradictory operational guidance memos.
Just memos piled on memos.
Exactly, memos that had piled up over decades of reactive rulemaking.
Nick West pointed out that this led to an environment that was suffocatingly prescriptive, a true one-size-fits-all mandate that left zero room for context. So, the primary objective of this revolutionary FIR overhaul is to strip away that bloat and replace it with a highly adaptive policy framework. They want to draw a very clear, bold line between what is legally required by statute and what is merely discretionary best practice.
To operationalize that, they are deploying a tool called the FAR Companion. It is this consolidated, modernized resource designed to offer interpretive guidance. It gives practical advice for planning, awarding, and managing contracts rather than just imposing rigid step-by-step orders.
It makes me think of the transition from early paper maps or old-school printed directions to modern GPS.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. The old rule book was essentially a navigator sitting in the passenger seat, screaming at the driver to keep their hands at exactly 10 and 2, forcing them to take a specific convoluted back road because, well, that's the official route.
Completely ignoring the fact that there is a massive traffic jam ahead.
Leaving the driver exhausted and the mission delayed.
Exactly.
But the new FAR Companion acts like a modern GPS. It clearly highlights the non-negotiable legal guardrails, like, you cannot drive off this cliff, or you are required to stop at this toll booth.
The hard rules.
The hard rules. But it finally grants the driver the authority to select the absolute best, most efficient route for their specific trip based on current conditions. Doesn't force every single procurement into the exact same traffic jam.
I think that captures the mechanics of the reform perfectly. Nick West, however, is careful to clarify a specific nuance here. The RFO is not fundamentally altering the role of the contracting officer.
Okay, meaning they are still responsible.
Right, they remain compliance officers and they remain business advisors. What the RFO profoundly alters is the level of discretion they have in executing that role.
Got it.
It transitions the environment from strict prescriptive rule following to interpretative contextual guidance. They are given the authority to look at that GPS, evaluate the options, and determine the smartest path for that unique procurement.
While that sounds incredibly empowering for the individual officer, from a macro management perspective, it seems incredibly risky.
How so?
Well, you are taking a shrinking workforce, handing them powerful generative AI tools, and suddenly granting them a massive amount of rulebook discretion. Doesn't that open the door to wild inconsistency across the federal government?
Oh, sure.
If everyone gets to choose their own route, won't every contract look completely different?
Yeah, and Nick West is actually remarkable candid about this exact vulnerability in the Federal News Network piece. He doesn't sugarcoat it at all.
Really?
Yeah, he flat out admits that yes, there will always be inconsistency. He does not believe there is a tried and true way to completely engineer consistency out of a system that relies on human judgment.
It is so refreshing to hear a government official just admit, yes, things will be inconsistent and we cannot entirely stop it.
It is a very realistic baseline, but he isn't accepting defeat either. The GSA's mitigation strategy for this inherent inconsistency is a radical shift in how they train their workforce.
Which brings us to the human solution.
Exactly. This is the human element that binds the technology and the policy together. They are moving entirely away from rote process memorization. They are no longer just handing new hires a massive binder of rules and telling them to memorize it.
Right. The internal analyst notes from June 18th detail this shift toward what they call use case-based learning. Because if you're going to grant someone discretion, you can't just train them on the rules. You have to train their judgment.
That's a great point.
So they are using that FR Companion as a primary onboarding tool to walk through real-world scenarios.
Because you build consistency not through rigid mandates, but through shared critical thinking models.
I was reading through these notes regarding what they call the Pilots Initiative, and it struck me as highly unusual because they are conducting real-time side-by-side audits,
Right, the auditors are right there.
Which is wild because in almost every major organization, oversight and auditing happen post-mortem at the very end of the project. How does moving the auditor into the room while the work is happening change the dynamic of the team?
It changes the fundamental psychology of the interaction. Under the traditional system, when an oversight team shows up after a contract is awarded to audit the file, human nature dictates an immediate defensive posture.
Of course.
The contracting officer feels they are under investigation, so they protect themselves by pointing to the rulebook, essentially saying, "Look, I followed every single step you mandated, so you can't blame me."
Because nobody wants to be the one who fails a federal audit and gets reprimanded. It creates a culture of fear where people just hide behind the process.
Precisely the behavior the GSA is trying to eliminate. With the pilot's initiative, the experts and auditors are working directly alongside the acquisition teams in real time.
So they are in the room?
They are in the room during the oral acquisition plans. They aren't waiting for the airplane to be built and flown before inspecting it for safety. They are helping to build the airplane, ensuring it meets code while simultaneously trying to optimize its speed.
So they are verifying that these massive speed gains we talked about earlier aren't coming at the expense of legal auditability.
Exactly. And as Wes points out, the psychological shift is profound. When an oversight team comes to the table and frames their presence as, "Hey, I want to help find the best practice for this specific activity," rather than, "I am here to find your mistakes,"
The defensiveness just vanishes.
it vanishes. The acquisition teams become open and collaborative. They share their ideas and actively seek feedback.
They stop viewing the oversight team as a threat and start viewing them as a partner. You know, the internal notes explicitly state that the ultimate goal of this training strategy is to create a safe space for managed risk-taking.
Managed risk-taking in the government.
Exactly. The concept of a massive federal bureaucracy actively encouraging its employees to take risks, even managed ones, feels completely counterintuitive to everything we assume about government operations.
It flies in the face of traditional bureaucratic design, but it is the only way a paradigm based on discretion can survive.
Makes sense.
If you give people advanced AI tools and the freedom to choose their own path, but you punish them the second they try an innovative approach that isn't perfectly by the book, well, they will instantly revert to the old, slow, safe methods.
They will go right back to filling out the inventory forms for flour to protect themselves.
Every single time. Building that psychological safety, that confidence to make sound judgment calls in real time is the linchpin of the entire transformation.
Putting all these pieces together paints a really compelling picture of organizational change. The GSA isn't just trying to survive a demographic crunch by demanding their exhausted workforce do more with less. They aren't just applying pressure to a broken system. They are actively reshaping the landscape. They are deploying AI to kill the manual busywork and handle the rote paperwork generation. They are utilizing the revolutionary FAR overhaul to slash through overly prescriptive red tape, replacing it with clear, interpretative guidance.
Yes.
And they are executing this hands-on, real-time training approach to build confident, strategic business advisors who actually possess the psychological safety to utilize their new discretion.
The implications of this extend far beyond federal procurement. It really doesn't matter if you are managing a massive international corporation, a scrappy tech startup, or honestly, simply trying to organize the chaotic schedule of your own household.
Right.
The underlying lesson regarding efficiency and human potential is incredibly universal.
Because to get better, faster, more innovative results, you cannot rely on rigid, top-down control systems that treat people like cogs. You have to genuinely empower the people doing the actual work.
You have to equip them with modern tools that remove the friction. You have to establish clear boundaries regarding what is truly mandatory versus what is just tradition. And most importantly, you have to cultivate an environment of trust where they feel safe using their own judgment to navigate the complex space in between those boundaries.
Yeah.
You have to let the chef cook.
Let the chef cook. I love that. Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over today. If a massive, historically rigid federal agency like the GSA, an organization literally built upon centuries of dense red tape, can systematically dismantle its own bureaucracy to create a safe space for managed risk-taking, what outdated one-size-fits-all rule in your own life, your career, or your organization are you still blindly following just because that's how it's always been done?
Something to think about.
Stop counting the flour and start focusing on the meal. That's all for today's deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.
A special thank you to MarketUS.com for furnishing us this information. You can reach them at MarketUS.com or call them at 954-636-3232. Before we go, this deep dive was created by the MarketUS.com team. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. It's right below the subscribe link.